Good morning, guys. Welcome to Glasgow Rangers Nation. I'm Owen James. This is all your latest Rangers news, guys. We've got couple of stories to get through this morning. We're going to talk possible rumours about a fallout between Nicholas Raskan and Russell Martin after the comments that he made after the Motherwell game. And obviously, Nicholas Raskan been dropped from the game against Victoria Plitzen on Tuesday night. Also, some bad news on the Ben Davies front. Well, it depends where you stand on Ben Davies. If you're a Ben Davies fan, you'll be over the moon. If you're not a Ben Davies fan, you'll be as sad as anything. So what is the story there? He looks like that move to Birmingham may well have fallen through. We'll talk a little bit of that shortly. Let's start off with the biggest news though, which was there's rumours and stories, and I get that look, we get that the media make things up, we get that the media like to cause trouble, and especially obviously in Scotland where on the whole the media hate Rangers. It's a, kind of like a standard fact, isn't it? But according to stories that are coming out of Scotland and coming out of the club, Nicholas Raskan is unhappy about the fact that he was dropped by Russell Martin for the game against Victoria Plitzen, and also I think the comments therefore him thinking that those comments then applied to him as regards Russell Martin talking about mentality, talking about dropping an ego, talking about obviously pulling your finger out and not obviously believing your own hype. Now, look, I think you've got to kind of look at this in the terms that it is. And Raskan obviously has had in recent times an awful lot of praise for his performances. He obviously made his debut for Belgium, starred and played exceptionally well alongside some exceptionally world talented players like Yuri Tielemans, Kevin De Bruyne, Romelu Lukaku, and looked every bit as good and as comfortable at home alongside those players. And obviously there were all the stories linking in with the moves to the English Premier League, with obviously the biggest one being the link to Aston Villa. Obviously Villa, who I think finished 5th last season, just missing out, or 6th last season, sorry, just missing out on a place in the Champions League thanks to some exceptionally questionable refereeing at Old Trafford on the final day of the season. Despite the fact they're an absolute joke, they still do carry a ridiculous amount of sway with referees down south, Manchester United. So Raskan was obviously linked with those big money moves. Look, I mean, he came back and he's shown, I think, a good attitude in training. The fact that he's obviously buckled down, he's got on with it, he hasn't kind of just kind of down tools and demanded a move like some have. We're seeing down south, aren't we, some players down south who are behaving in that way. Certainly, you've only got to look at Alexander Isak at Newcastle and the way that he's kind of downed tools at Newcastle and is demanding a move away from there. To see that players do and can do that. But Raskan didn't do that. Obviously, he came back to training. He trained with the club and did everything right. Now, Raskan has been asked to do a slightly different job to last season. Now, if you look at how he played last season, he played as a 6 after he came back from injury and was absolutely outstanding. And I think, under Barry Ferguson, I think that's the one thing Barry Ferguson did do right was how he got the best out of Raskan. Raskan at times reminded us of prime Barry Ferguson in that 6 role for Rangers, and I thought he was outstanding. Now, Raskan has been asked to do a slightly different job this year and has been kind of put more into an 8, played more forward, asked to get forward a little bit more, asked to influence the play a little bit more, which perhaps doesn't suit. And I think Raskan has a desire to go back to playing in that 6 role, which now Joe Rothwell has taken. Obviously, Rangers signing Joe Rothwell on a permanent basis. So, look, I think to some degree, obviously, Russell Martin's got his man, which is Joe Rothwell, and he sees Rothwell as his 6. Therefore, he's looked at Nicholas Raskan, thought, well, this is an outstanding player, this is a top player, I've got to use him, pushed him into a different role, and it's kind of, I think, put Raskan's nose out a little bit and upset Raskan a little bit. Yes, Raskan's performances perhaps have not been of the same standard as they were last season. He's still an exceptionally talented player, and I think there's 1 or 2 Rangers fans that come onto this channel and on other channels that have been absolutely slaughtering the lad. And if you're one of those fans of slaughtering Raskan and saying that he's pish, I genuinely don't think you know what you're talking about, because this is a lad who, when he's played for Belgium alongside some of the best players in world football, has looked as good as them. So I don't think you can level that at Nicholas Raskan. But the concern you've got when it comes to Raskan very much is the fact that he obviously has this at the back of his mind, that he's been linked with a move elsewhere, that he's been linked to the fact that he is certainly a player who could obviously demand a move elsewhere. But The rumour is, like I said, that he's fallen out with the manager because of the fact that he's been dropped, and these comments have seemingly been targeted towards. Well, he's feeling that these comments have been very much targeted towards him. He doesn't like them. Now, he seemed very agitated on the sidelines on Tuesday night. He seemed very antsy, very much, in the face of and getting that rather bizarre booking for delaying the restart and then mouthing off at the fourth official. He did not seem at all happy. Now, when he came on the park, he played well. He acquitted himself well. Played in that 6 role and actually looked better. Now, I don't know what the exact situation is between the two of them, and I think if there is a impasse between Martin and between him and Martin and Raskin, it's something that needs to be overcome. It certainly seems the Raskin exit rumours seem to be dying a death at this moment in time, which is positive. We need to hang on to as many of our players as is possible for this season, and as many of our talented players as possible. So you've got to kind of hope that this is all just a load of media gumph, media rubbish. But you can see perhaps some elements in it. Given the comments, given Raskin's drop off in form, given the fact that he's kind of feels, I think, that his nose has been pushed out a little bit. And you've got to kind of see that, as well as Rothwell has done, and I'm not anti-Rothwell by any stretch of the imagination, and he has done well since coming to the club. You've got to kind of question is he as good as Raskin in that 6 role? If you look back at what Raskin did last season for Rangers and for Belgium, Raskin looked a quality player, a world-class talent. So why would you move someone who looked world-class in that position out of that position? I genuinely don't understand it. So, look, it's one I think that will run until Raskin finds a role within the team, or he goes back to that 6 role, or there's kind of a sharing of the role between Rothwell, or maybe Raskin moves on. I don't know, but it's very interesting, this story that has come out in the last sort of day or two after the fact that Raskin was left out of the team rather surprisingly. Right, the other story I wanted to talk about this morning is Ben Davies. Now, it did seem like Ben Davies was on the move and heading for Birmingham City, obviously where he spent the whole of last season on loan. Playing very well by all accounts. He's looking like a quality player, and Birmingham City seem to be really into getting him. Now, the talk was of a permanent transfer for Ben Davies, a move away from the club. The fee around £700,000, which I know some people kind of balked at and kind of questioned. But he's entering the last 12 months of his contract. You're not going to get a massive fee for a player entering the last 12 months of your contract. You're certainly going to get a depressed fee. You've only got to look, around Europe and around England, for example, to see players who are entering the final years of their contracts being transferred for perhaps slightly less than their market value. I mean, if you take, for example, Mark Gahey, who's the Crystal Palace captain and England international, a player that's probably worth 80 million pounds as a centre half. His price at the moment is around 40 million. Given the fact that he's got 12 months left on his deal, you're not going to get the market value for him because he's got 12 months left. And the attitude is always going to be, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just sit and wait. Now, obviously, Davies is one of Rangers' higher wage earners. Obviously, signed under Ross Wilson, given a ridiculous contract. Wages reportedly around about the £30,000 a week mark, which is absolutely ludicrous. Now, this may have been down to the fact that obviously we were signing him from England. Players in England are, on the whole, on higher wages. That's just how it works because the EFL Championship and the EPL obviously have a lot higher budgets than the SPL. So obviously, Davies is on decent wages. In fact, 30 grand puts him at only 5 grand below James Tavernier, who's on £35,000 a week. Anyway, look, 30 grand a week for Ben Davies. I think a lot of us would kind of question whether he's worth that or not. And I think, you'd be quite within your rights to say he's certainly not worth that. Now, it seemed like everything was agreed, that all the parts of the contract were agreed, that the move was going ahead, that the two clubs had come to an arrangement. Now, according to reports, the move has stalled and fallen down over wage demands. Even though Ben Davies is moving to an EFL Championship club, Birmingham are just promoted from League One. So obviously, the fact that they are coming out of League One, which has a lower budget than the EFL Championship due to the TV rights, Birmingham is still to some degree influenced by PSR considerations from the previous years. So obviously have to be careful with the wages they're paying out. 82% of your revenue going out is wages, transfer fees, etc., etc. So Birmingham are unwilling to offer Ben Davies £30,000 a week in the Championship, which is fair enough. You look at it and you kind of think, well, yeah, he's not really worth £30,000 a week. Now, Ben Davies is unwilling to take a wage cut. Now, with the, with the fear of getting yelled at, as I did last time when I accused Robin Proper of being greedy over this. Yes, look, you wouldn't necessarily take a wage cut to move jobs unless you really hated the job you were in. And I did actually take a wage cut to move jobs at one point because I really hated the job that I was in. I actually took a £6,500 wage cut to move jobs because I hated the job that I was doing. But at the end of the day, realistically, yes, you're probably not going to take a wage cut. So you can kind of understand where Ben Davies is coming from. Now, look, Ben Davies, you could say, is being greedy, is being ridiculous, is kind of been a bit mercenary. I think he's got to look at it in terms of this. If he says to Birmingham, I'm not willing to come unless you're willing to pay me big money, like 30 grand a week, 25 grand a week, whatever, then he's really cutting his nose off to spite his own face, because he's going to be obviously here at Rangers. He isn't going to be used. He isn't going to be played. He's going to be sat on the sidelines. He's going to have 12 months of doing nothing, which obviously then is going to depreciate the clubs that are going to come in for him. Will naturally, of course, put him in a position where clubs are going to look at him and go, well, I'm not going to give you anywhere near that. I'm not going to give you 15 grand a week. You haven't been playing for 12 months. You're not match sharp. You haven't got any match fitness. You've taken completely the wrong decision. And I think to some degree, Ben Davies has taken completely the wrong decision. However, you've also got to blame Rangers to some degree, because, you look back on this, and I'm not blaming the present board. They're certainly not to blame at all. But you look at the last board, who were an absolute bunch of charlatans, with Douglas Park, for example, and John Bennett, absolutely ludicrous morons who couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery. As we've seen from Philippe Clement's comments of late, Clement talking about the chaos that was Rangers whilst he was there. And the fact that Ross Wilson, obviously, as well, that they agreed to pay these massive wages to very, very average footballers. And I think it's something we're still suffering from in a lot of cases. And it's not just, obviously, Ross Wilson and the last board. It's also Michael Beale as well, with players, at the club who are on ludicrously high wages for their talent levels. So you look at it from that point of view, and you can kind of see why the move has broken down. Now, it could be that there's some way around this, that there's some sort of compensation payoff arrangement can be come to. Rangers may pay him off to some degree, and he then moves to Birmingham. That may be one way around it. I don't know. That could be a possibility. There was certainly a way round the Robin Proper impasse. I think that was when Twente offered him a longer term deal with slightly better terms. So, maybe that's something that Birmingham come back in. But at the moment, the deal has broken down. It is completely stalled, and Davies is still a Rangers player, which is not great news, considering, like I said, he's on 30 grand a week and he isn't part of the manager's plans, which, again, we're going to be stuck with someone taking up a massive part of the wage budget who isn't contributing. And that's not a good thing. That is a really, really bad thing. And that is down to massive mismanagement by the last board and the last sporting director we had. Well, not last, the one before that, Ross Wilson, obviously, who was absolutely useless. Guys, I'd love to get your thoughts on that Ben Davies story. Obviously, all the focus now turns towards Dundee on Saturday at 5:45 kickoff. Really ridiculous time on a Saturday to have a football match. I think it's either 12 o'clock or it's 3 o'clock for me on a Saturday. I don't get the 5:45 kickoffs. Don't support a 5:45 kickoff in the slightest. I think it's ridiculous. We'll obviously build up to that game over the next few days, so obviously look out for the videos on that. Look, I personally think that Martin should go with exact, barring any injuries that have come up over the last sort of few days. Hopefully Aaron's is fit. I hope that he goes with largely the same team that we went with on Tuesday night. Perhaps, you could bring Mikey Moore in for Gassama, to give Gassama a bit of a rest. Obviously with one eye on the second leg. But certainly, that wouldn't weaken the team any. I think Mikey Moore is an absolute class act. Or you start with the same team, and then once you get a couple of goals up, that's when you make your changes. That's when you kind of start to bring these players on. That, for me, would be a good move by the manager. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you for watching Glasgow Rangers Nation. If you've enjoyed the content, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And we'll catch you on the next one. Take care. See you later.